A lot of these crypto projects were almost like solutions in search of a problem. And what blew me away was how it solved a whole bunch of the problems that I'd been failing miserably to solve in the traditional finance world. And the smart guys just use this as exit liquidity, and then, they'll sell out and buy back in at the bottom.
What's the goal with Wispir? Have you spoken to Gary Vee about it?
We haven't. Not yet.
Neal, hello.
Ben, hello.
Welcome.
Good evening.
Good evening. I'm doing very well. Thank you so much for hopping on the call. It's a Friday evening, 8 p.m. on a Friday, so everyone out there who's listening, that's what it takes.
It's bad, isn't it? Like, we should be out partying, but we're doing this, which is much more fun. I have brought a glass of wine with me, though, so all is well.
You're rewarding yourself for a week well spent. Cool. So just to give a little bit of context, so you are Neal, you're co-founder of MIN, spelled MIN3, Web3 consulting company, and you're also co-founder at Wispir, which is a blockchain wine and spirits platform.
Right.
And funny thing, I got to speak to you basically because I met one of your employees at an AI event, who introduced me to another one of your employees, who then introduced me to you.
Okay.
So you're a hard man to get to.
I apologise for that. I hope they were relatively complimentary. Depends which employees you spoke to.
I can message you the names afterwards. But, no, they were all very helpful because I'm very new to the industry, and obviously you have a wealth of experience. So before we get started, I'd love to just get a bit of an introduction from you.
Okay. Yeah, sure. So I guess this is my 24th year in my career. I've really been a sort of career consultant, I guess, for good or ill. I started working at a company called Anderson Consulting back in 2000, which then became Accenture a year or two later. Wow. And then, subsequent to that, worked for other people, Capgemini, Invent, etc., in a sort of 20-year-ish kind of big consulting in inverted commas type career. I guess my specialty, I started life as a strategy consultant, and then I've sort of evolved into kind of like a niche position, I suppose, where I sort of sit halfway between strategy, and that's business strategy, product strategy, and engineering, so particularly kind of software engineering. So I tend to act as a translation layer between those two things, so, helping companies, clients with their strategies for both their business and for their products, and then the kind of execution of those strategies using technology. So that's kind of been my niche. From an industry perspective, I started life in what Accenture called resources industries. So this is like oil and gas, mining, utilities, kind of dirty stuff. And then probably for the last decade or so, I was primarily focused on financial services. And particularly retail banking. And I guess in that world, I was responsible in a number of different guises for trying to transform the existing sort of tech stacks of big, kind of humongous kind of retail banks. And behind the scenes, these banks are generally, from a technical perspective, a lot of their technology has been built from the 70s onwards. They've got these, kind of big monolithic apps, millions of lines of code servicing, hundreds of user journeys, and they've kind of grown a little bit out of control. So, if you think about them almost as like big balls of spaghetti, where you have all of these user journeys that are like tangled up together.
Yeah. And
these banks quite rightly have a 0% attitude to outage. So if any of their accounts go down or their services go down, it's headline news within seconds. So they have zero tolerance to that. And as a result of that, they've got to make changes to these big balls of spaghetti, but make sure that those changes are 100% safe. And that's really challenging. And the thing that gives all the time is basically time and price. Because if you pull on one of these kind of strings of spaghetti to make a change to that one, generally speaking, it brings everything else with it. So they end up having to do huge amounts of testing, like the whole surface area of that spaghetti. So if you compare them to like a more agile fintech or a challenger bank, it's generally speaking like 6 to 10 times more expensive and time consuming to make a change at these big banks than it would be with a more kind of, agile type startup. So I spent lots of effort trying to kind of rebuild. So it was either take these applications apart, re-deliver them bit by bit, or deliver a new architecture on the side and by stealth kind of introduce that into the ecosystem. But broadly speaking, kind of failed to affect change over a kind of 5, 6, 7 year period of doing that with these big banks. So that was kind of going on in my career. And then like one lunchtime, effectively, we had a kind of personal circumstance at home. My wife got sick. She's all good now, so it's not an issue, but had to kind of step away from work pretty quickly. And that afforded me for the first time in a long time to spend time looking at some of the stuff that I'd, kind of put on the side and not focused on. And in particular, that was the crypto or digital asset space. So I'd had interest in Bitcoin in sort of 2012, 2014. The industry had kind of been in my peripheral vision for the subsequent 6, 7 years and hadn't really spent any time looking at it. And this event kind of gave me, I guess, that opportunity to have a look at the space again. And what blew me away within, a kind of day or 2 days, particularly looking at like DeFi and some of the stuff that's being built out on smart contracts, blockchains like Ethereum, was how far they'd come in that time period, and actually how it solved, or they solved, a whole bunch of the problems that I'd been, failing miserably to solve in the traditional finance world. And as soon as I'd seen that, I was never going to go back into traditional finance because, honestly, the solutions in that space sit in the blockchain world. And once you've seen it, it's very difficult to unsee. Yeah. So from there, I was really kind of fishing around for, okay, well, what can I do in that space? What interesting projects can I go after, and so on and so forth. So I'll kind of pause there because that's a lot, but I'm happy to then talk about, well, what did I do from there onwards?
Yeah, I remember first hearing about Bitcoin. It was some news article about how someone made a bunch of money off of Bitcoin. And of course, me being the silly teenager that I was, I bought into it and then lost all my money right away. So that was a swift kick in the butt for me.
Yeah, and like this is kind of how it works, right? This is sort of how everybody gets in, because really, us guys, retail, tend to only really hear about it when the price is going up. And, it kind of, from a price perspective, operates in cycles roughly, every 4 years will kind of peak and trough. It's very much connected to like global liquidity cycles. So, we all hear about it when it's in the news, when the price is right at the top of those cycles. We all rush in, and the smart guys just use this as exit liquidity, and then, they'll sell out and buy back in at the bottom. So, I think the trick almost is to learn that lesson quickly and not to exit the ecosystem forever. So you don't get, you get burnt by it. You learn the lesson, you come back in, rather than saying that, listen, this space is not for me, it's too volatile. Yeah. You kind of have to understand a little bit more about how the ecosystem works and basically develop long-time horizons, long-time preferences. It's it's kind of long-term investment in the space for sure.
Yeah, it's a lot like entrepreneurship, the way that you put that. Yeah,
100%. Yeah. 100%.
So you mentioned, I don't know if this will get too technical, but you mentioned that you saw some solutions that this blockchain technology was able to implement that you failed to implement within the more traditional banking industry. Could you give me just a couple of examples?
So probably the easiest way to explain it would be that each of the banks basically operates in a walled garden. So what I mean by that is it's got its own technology stack. And, we're all making transactions between each other. So let's take, kind of payments as an example. I want to send you money, or for example, I walk into a coffee shop, pay with a credit card that's issued by, some bank or other, but with MasterCard or Visa or Amex or whoever's sitting behind it. All of these companies exist in their own walled gardens. It's generally pretty inefficient when you're basically, having to kind of translate into each of the different languages that all the banks are using. So when we make a payment, let's say I go into a coffee shop, I go buy a coffee with my credit card or whatever, it feels to me like, as a consumer, that my payment is made instantly. That payment isn't made instantly. Basically what happens is that like a bunch of messages ping around between credit card issuers and banks on my side, on the coffee shop side, etc. And at the point of sale, they kind of make a commitment that this payment will be honored at a point in time. But that's all done at a messaging level. It's not, a kind of native payment. And then that payment will get settled with the coffee shop, let's say 1-2 days later, and minus like a big chunk of fees that all of the banks and the intermediaries have taken along the way. Crypto or blockchain, when it's permissionless, doesn't work like that, right? It's one big kind of open, decentralized system that anybody can access. So instead of having all of these kind of walled gardens where you have all of these inefficiency points, and it results in friction both from a time and a cost perspective, in the crypto world you don't have that, right? It's open, permissionless. Everybody is looking at the same set of information. And rather than, kind of pinging messages around and then settling payments later, you're settling payments natively on the chain. Like the money exists. It is internet money. It is digitally native. So, all of that kind of friction that's been built into the traditional financial system that existed long before the internet existed, all of that is kind of removed in that, kind of FS world by blockchain, by crypto, which is, is money built for the internet, built natively on the internet. We've not basically superimposed that, kind of non-digital money on a digital system that's different flavor of digital for everybody that's involved in it. It's, it's open, permissionless, standardized in the blockchain world. So, and ultimately, like what it means is that you remove a bunch of those frictions. So, when we're making payments natively on the blockchain, it settles, almost instantly, depending on the chain, and it can be done for, near free, again, depending on the chain. So you're removing both a whole bunch of, time and cost from the ecosystem.
Right. Okay. There's a bunch of sort of transaction-based SaaS. I'm mainly thinking of Stripe now. Just because I've used it in the past for businesses that I've built. But businesses like that kind of facilitate that translating between languages, right? Is there still space for opportunities like that within the crypto space?
No. I think crypto disintermediates them, and like literally today we're talking to people in the financial services world about products that will disintermediate Stripe. A reasonable example, but they haven't gone this far yet, is a company called Strike, as opposed to Stripe. They do a thing where their kind of primary use case was remittances. So, for example, in the US, you have a whole bunch of people, let's say, that have come from Mexico or work in the US, and they're sending back kind of micro payments to their family. Let's say it's $100 a week or a month or whatever. The amount of friction on those payments is crazy. And it's kind of almost upside down that those people that are, the most disadvantaged making small micropayments are the ones that are hurt the most in percentage terms. So let's say they go into Western Union, and they go and wire that money back to, to their family. What generally happens with those micropayments is that there'll be a minimum payment that's applied by a credit union like Western Union. So they might take $20 from that $100 because that's the minimum amount that they would take in fees, and then they apply their percentage after it. So they'll, it gets very heavily, there's a lot of fee on that transaction. It then, gets wired back to a credit union back in Mexico. That might take like 1 or 2 days to land. Their family have to then come, to that credit union, go withdraw it, all of that type of stuff. So Strike was created to kind of solve the remittances problem, where there's a lot of friction in those remittance type payments, particularly at the micropayments level. And what those guys do is effectively that you get an app on either side, so on the smartphone on either side. Let's say I'm sending money to you. I basically load dollars, for example, into the app, and I want to send you pesos. So what Strike do is they basically convert the dollars to Bitcoin, then send Bitcoin from my side to Bitcoin your side, and then convert back from Bitcoin to pesos.
Yeah.
And because the Bitcoin rails are so, kind of friction free, they use a layer 2 built on top of Bitcoin called Lightning, hence why the Strike. So basically what that means is that micro payment, instead of it, let's say, having 20+% fees applied to it, and it taking, 1-2 days or something to settle with you, becomes like, fractions of cents, and it arrives in your wallet in like instantaneously, like literally as soon as I hit the button, it's there. You can see it. So that's not the full Stripe type solution, the payment service provision, but it's not a long hop from doing that type of thing, converting from fiat into some other instrument, sending that on the blockchain, and then converting back the other side. You could absolutely do that in an e-commerce setting. And if Strike don't do it, there'll be a whole bunch of other people that do that on, either Bitcoin or on some other blockchain, most probably Ethereum or one of the Ethereum scaling solutions, the layer twos. So I know that there's a bunch of people working on that type of stuff. So my sense is that people like Stripe will get disintermediated pretty quickly, and it might be by that type of technology. It might just be by people moving away from non-digital fiat money altogether. So what I mean by that is using tokenized fiat, so stable coins or CBDCs, if you've heard of either of those. So effectively having like digitally native versions of the pound, of the dollar, or whatever. And in those instances, you don't need Stripe. You basically just kind of pay with the stable coin, and all of that gets executed on the blockchain. So my high level view is that all of the payment service providers, all of the banks will get disintermediated over time, or will get replaced by blockchain solutions over time. And it won't be wholesale. Like we wouldn't be in a position to replace like the whole of a retail bank's functions today, but we can certainly do payments, and we can certainly do, small slithers of what the banking world do. So it will start with all of that sort of stuff. It will eat their payments lunch, and eventually it will come for credit and those higher value services a little bit further down the line. So, my high level take is that if you're a bank, it's kind of adapt or die time. And it, as with technology, as was always true in technology, like people like me probably overestimate how quickly it will arrive, but probably underestimate once it's arrived how quickly the impact will be felt. So, brain, I sort of think, 0 to 5 years that this sort of transformation will happen. Let's say it's probably going to be longer than that, maybe like 5 to 10, 5 to 15, something like that. But when it happens, it will happen very quickly. So if you're smart and you're, working at a retail bank, you're already looking at blockchain and how this stuff, will disintermediate you. If you're not, you're in trouble in 5 to 10 years' time.
Nice. Wow. Okay. The way that you put that with the user journey as an example puts it into context quite nicely. I think I was thinking about Monzo, which is a bank in the UK that I use, and they have a feature where you can send money to someone else who has a Monzo account just by having their phone number.
Yeah.
So it's like kind of that frictionless journey, but you don't need to be on Monzo to be able to use it. I could go on. I could ask a bunch of questions about this. Yeah, I know. But just to bring it back, so you started out with a consulting background, and then you realized you saw this opportunity with blockchain technology. What did you do afterwards?
So sorry, thank you, keeping me back on track. So I kind of fished around a little bit for people that I knew that operated in the space, and through a friend, now a colleague, a co-founder, I met a guy that was operating a DAO, so it stands for Decentralized Autonomous Organization. So effectively like a company, but not controlled by any one individual. Generally speaking, not like a kind of pyramidal resource structure like you would have in a traditional company. And what this DAO was trying to do, it's now defunct, by the way. It didn't work. It was pretty experimental. But what it was trying to do was basically mint an NFT on a frequent basis, let's say every day, and then sell that NFT out into the market. And if you bought that NFT, that digital token, that entitled you automatically to access to the community. And generally speaking, what the community would do is that they would take the money that was used to buy the NFT into its treasury, and it would then act as a VC for Web3 crypto type projects. So either Web2 traditional companies that were looking to try to do something innovative in the crypto space, or people that were trying to build kind of crypto native projects. So I think the idea, generally speaking, was good. Where it failed was on the organization side. Lots of lessons from that, but I think DAOs can work well, but probably only with certain rules applied to them. So if they're going to be like ours was, where decision making was not fully automated, as in, everybody who's got voting power votes on a change, and if that change is voted in, then basically it executes automatically in code. Those types of DAOs work quite well, because when you're voting, you can be very clear on, this is what the code says. If we vote yes and this is approved, the code executes, you know what's going to happen. We were working in a much more kind of subjective environment where, collectively we were taking decisions within the DAO, and then, some person has to go and execute on that plan. And it ended up almost being too many cooks spoiling the broth. This kind of collective decision making and collective requirement to go and make change just didn't really work unless you've got like the right mix of people and a really clear responsibility structure where, person X is responsible for this area. I think within this particular DAO, we probably had too many people that were sat on the kind of creative side, and not enough people sat in the getting stuff done side. So I think that those types of DAOs where they're not fully autonomous, they're more do's or something, can work. But I think with very specific structure, I think they need like management contracts where a set of people are given, a set of roles for a period of time. So it's kind of somewhat centralized. And then that management contract, can either be refreshed by community vote over a period of time, so that, if the management doesn't do a good job, they get voted out, that's kind of the end of that contract, their jobs. If they do a good job, that contract rolls on until the point where you can build in enough sophistication so that you can automate a lot of that decision making and action taking function. But I think we were just operating with the wrong mix of people, too little centralization for a kind of non-autonomous organization. And it was an experimental project, and it didn't really work out. But what was really interesting from my perspective, apart from learning those types of lessons, was that a lot of these crypto projects were almost like solutions in search of a problem. Like they had some great technology and some great creative ideas, but not necessarily like a clear strategy that sits behind it. Like, why are they doing that? Who's the audience? How do they follow through on that? So there were lots of opportunities for somebody with like a consulting brain or consulting history to go work with those companies and, create some structure, create some, kind of business fundamentals for them. So MIN, the consulting company, was basically born out of that experience, because we were seeing all of these opportunities and a real need for that type of capability. So we set MIN up basically for that purpose. And the company has kind of evolved from there. So we're now like 2.5 years old or whatever. We started with, 2 non-paid founders. We're now like somewhere between 15 and 20 people. So, we're not large, we're small. But we are bigger than we were 2 years ago. And we started with like 0 clients and, no particular leads other than stuff that we were coming across in the DAO. So in the consulting world, generally speaking, you normally have to get over one problem with a client. So it might be that you're trying to sell them like a new idea, something innovative, but you're a big company and therefore you're not having to sell them on you, the company. Or you might be, a small new company, but you're selling them, generally speaking, on something that's become more commoditized. So getting a client over like one hurdle is tough but doable. So you might have a success rate of like, 1 in 3, 1 in 4 if you're pitching. In the early days for us, it was like 1 in 10, 1 in 15, 1 in 20, because effectively we're having to get people over 2 hurdles. It's like new company, albeit, fairly established senior consulting people, but we've got to get them over that new company hurdle. And we're also having to get them over the hurdle of like, blockchain, crypto, Daft 8 pitches, like that type of stuff. So it was definitely pretty tough going in the early days. We've had to sort of grind quite a bit to build up that client base. But once you get, 1, 2 good use cases, you do a lot more networking or whatever, then, this stuff will always start to snowball. It's just, you've got to hang in there, I guess, have a decent runway.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. What does MIN offer? What are the core services?
A good question. I should have, that would have been a good thing for me to leave. This is why we're not growing quicker, because I'm so bad at pitching it.
You're passionate about your ideas.
Yeah, exactly. But I've skipped straight to the idea. So basically we see ourselves as being an end-to-end consultancy. Okay. But I should break that down. Like how we differentiate ourselves, we think, is on the strategy piece. So strategy is kind of at the core of everything we do. So, we don't go into a client and like start talking crypto blockchainy stuff with them like day one. What we do is we talk to them about, well, what's their strategy? What are they trying to do as a business? Or what are they trying to do as a business division? Or what are they trying to do with this set of products or whatever? And then what we do is we start to think about where it's appropriate. How do you use emerging technology? Let's say blockchain, crypto, or we do a bunch of AI type stuff as well. How do you use that type of emerging technology to turbocharge your delivery, your execution on that strategy? And from there, basically, we operate on an end-to-end basis. So we'll do, design, we'll do build, we'll do, run, operation, like the full suite, basically. And that's right the way across, like, kind of standardized services that you'd expect, like, web build, app build, all of that type of stuff. And then that, that kind of emerging technology stuff on the on top of that.
Okay. So full stack, starting with the strategy. How do you define strategy?
That's a good question. I guess rather than defining it, I'd probably talk about what we do to kind of get there. So typically what we try to do with every business is we look at them within their context. So you look at their industry. What are they trying to go after? What are the external threats and opportunities to that industry? Then we look at them a lot as a business, how they're operating, their strengths, their weaknesses, and you almost kind of bring those two things together to then try and understand, well, okay, are they in the right market? Do they have opportunities to kind of expand their market? But ultimately, like, how do they create the best fit, I guess, between what they're great at as a company and the market that they're going after? So we spend a lot of time, I guess, up front thinking about like the context that the companies sit within in terms of their industries, and then basically their position within that industry, the stuff that they're good at, the stuff they're not good at. And then, quite often the sort of technical roadmap will fall out of that. I can talk about some specific examples, but might bring that to life a little bit. So what it would probably be good to do, given that I've got a glass of wine in my hand, so we formed this company that you alluded to at the beginning called Wispir, which is focused on the wine and spirits industry and disrupting that industry. And the journey for that business came really because I spend probably about 3 or 4 months a year out in a place called Pauillac, which is in the Medoc and in the Bordeaux wine region. So if you've heard of places like Chateau Latour or Mouton Rothschild or Lafite Rothschild, they're all in this little village. And I had no like wine background other than like imbibing it before we started spending time there. And what was interesting to me, as an outsider coming into that world, because there's like in this little village where we, where we stay, there isn't anything except wine, right? So you don't talk about anything else with like, with the people that live there. Like everybody works in the industry. It's, it's basically a wine place. And what was interesting to me is that it was probably the most heavily intermediated industry that I'd ever come across. Apart from diamond mining, which I spent, a few years in a couple of decades ago. And, generally speaking, if you're wearing a diamond in your ear, on your finger or whatever, in general, that diamond will have passed through somewhere around like 15 to 20 hands before it gets to you. And the problem with that is kind of twofold. One is that it becomes way more expensive to the retail customer because everybody's taking their cut along the way. And two, it means that the people that are producing that diamond, that thing, know nothing about their customers because there are so many layers in between the two. And that's true to a slightly lesser extent with things like wine and spirits. And Bordeaux might be like the most extreme example of it. But in the Bordeaux system, generally speaking, the way that it works is that if I produce a wine, I work with a set of people called courtiers, who are like sort of wine negotiators or whisperers. They then communicate on my behalf with a bunch of people called negociants, who are kind of wholesalers. And then those negociants will sell to distributors or sell to merchants. And eventually, we go drink a glass of wine. And having started working in the blockchain space, what was immediately apparent to me was that blockchain is brilliant at disintermediating, at creating these relationships between producer and consumer and really strengthening those relationships. So, for me, as soon as I started to see that, and that kind of clicked with me, like we were going to try and do something in that space and use the technology to disintermediate that industry. And I think there's a huge opportunity there. And once we'd started on that journey, just through networks, we also met one of my co-founders who's a real expert in the spirits world. And whilst the situations are somewhat different, like there are a lot of parallels, it's very heavily intermediated, etc. So we kind of brought those two offerings together, the wine offering and the spirits offering, to really try and go and disrupt that industry. So it's a kind of platform play, but it's deeply rooted in the context of the industry, how that industry operates, and how technology can be used to basically go and disrupt that industry. And I can talk a lot about, like how it does that, like what are the mechanisms, what does blockchain bring? Because I don't think it's immediately obvious to everybody. But, essentially that's the aim. That was the kind of strategy piece that we'd done to understand the size of that market, the friction in that market, the opportunities if somebody can go in and, remove that friction. What does the size of that opportunity look like? And it's, it's pretty significant, right? It's $1 trillion industry.
Yeah. Sensing a theme here, removing the middleman.
Yeah, that's one of the things that very early on in the mine world, we drew out this very kind of ugly diagram that we used to talk to clients about like the things that blockchain was great at, so bringing transparency, creating this kind of permissionless state where, everybody's looking at the same set of data, operating in the same ecosystem, removing those barriers. And one of the things that was like right in the middle of that diagram was like disintermediation. Is fantastic at that. And I think all of those industries where you have an intermediary between, the initiator and the customer, like the payments examples that we're talking about, like they don't need intermediaries anymore. We don't need the banks anymore. Like we can do this stuff peer to peer. So it's fantastic at that disintermediation thing.
So the platform takes the role of these several steps that you've mentioned. It forms the link between consumer and producer. Is that? Yeah.
So effectively, what we do is we allow, or we provide the technology for producers to tokenize their wine. So what I mean by that is that they'll have a physical bottle of wine, let's say, or a physical bottle of spirits, or it might even be a cask, right, with a lot more liquid in it. But we allow people to tokenize that. So create effectively a digital twin, a digital representation on the blockchain for that item. And we built some technology that allows people with like zero technical knowledge, just interacting with a very kind of simple web form to do that. And once you've tokenized a thing, that in and of itself is quite useful. So first of all, for example, it's very good at helping with provenance, so removing fakes and forgeries, because what you're doing when you create this kind of inextricable link between the digital and physical object is that the digital object lives on a blockchain, which is immutable, so can't ever be changed, and transparent. So I can see every time that thing is sold or passed on or whatever, you can see that on a blockchain. So you have provenance all the way back to the person that produced it. We know through the wallet or whatever, like who produced that thing. It's not perfect, but what it is great at doing is kind of building up patterns, so it becomes much easier to spot when people are trying to fake or forge wine. So some kind of useful stuff there. It's also been used by a bunch of people and will be by us to kind of help with the sustainable credentials of a producer. So let's say, for example, I'm producing organically or biodynamically. I'm not putting any chemical into my wine. Blockchain is a really good way of like creating this record of what chemical, what water, what living wage has been paid in the production of that wine. So every bottle kind of has this signature where it's super clear all the way back to the producer, like, this is how green or otherwise that product is. And then we will simplify that on the platform by giving it, kind of red, amber, green type ratings, so that in a world where producers are aiming to be sustainable but have no real way of like quantifiably demonstrating how sustainable they are and differentiating on that basis, we can start to bring some of that stuff to life using, again, the kind of blockchain base. In both the spirits but also the kind of wine context, what it's also really good at is kind of giving the producers of something a share in the secondary market. So again, if I go back to like my Bordeaux context, a lot of the red wines that are produced in Bordeaux might not peak in terms of their quality for like 20, 30, even sometimes longer years, depending on, how great a wine it is and how great the year was. And generally, as that wine gets better, as it ages, as people drink it, it becomes rarer, the more valuable it becomes. But for the producers, they don't take any share in that secondary market, generally speaking. They sell it as futures, so before it's even been bottled into the negociants, and then whoever is holding that wine over time basically takes the full value of that secondary market. What you can do with the blockchain stuff is, because these are smart contracts, you can create the structures whereby every time that bottle is sold, every time that digital twin passes from one owner to another, the price that was paid for that, a portion of that can be automatically sent back to the producer, so they can start to share in the secondary market. So it starts to give them some advantages for producing these great, long-lasting, kind of products that increase in value.
Yeah.
But the most valuable thing at that foundational level is data. So most producers, they probably understand like maybe 1% of their customer base. So if I'm a producer and I won't know who you are, Ben, drinking my wine or my spirit, like they just don't. And that's really problematic. Again, like if I give it the Bordeaux context, these guys produce like big, heavy tannic wine that goes great with, kind of red meat and that type of stuff. But in a world where, a lot of people are cutting down on their meat intake or, cutting down on their alcohol consumption, that's become really problematic for Bordeaux. Their wines are weighing in at 14, 15%. And all of a sudden, like their market's gone in one direction and they've gone in another. And they've only realized that, at a point where it starts to become a little bit too late because they're just not connected to their consumers. So what the blockchain is brilliant at is basically giving you all of this data. So we can understand through our on-chain analytics, if I as a producer have sold to you, I can see that you, Ben, the details attached to this wallet have bought my wine. I can see how much of it you've bought. I can see what you're doing with that wine. I can see who else's wine or spirits or whatever you've bought and in what quantity. So I can start to see what who my competition are appealing to. And I could even, even if I haven't sold to you, let's say I want to go after, 18 to 35-year-old females in China, I can start to understand through this on-chain analytics. Sorry, I was looking at you, but I didn't mean you. But you can start to understand like who's doing well in that market, and therefore, what are they doing to kind of win in that market. So all of a sudden, you get all of this rich data that these guys like pay gazillions of dollars, to try and access through, kind of opaque methodology with third-party providers. All of that stuff becomes like free out of the box on chain.
Yeah.
And like all of that foundational stuff is just foundational. That's the very beginning of the benefit. The real big benefit comes in where it's like, I know you, Ben, have bought my wine. As a result of doing that, you holding my NFT, my digital twin, I can start to now offer you stuff. You get exclusive access to a range of benefits that I can curate for you. I can invite you into my community with my other holders, and I can start to give you incentives to behave in a way that benefits you and me and the rest of the community. And I can tier those benefits, those incentives, depending on what I want you to do. Do I want you to buy more? Yeah, probably. Do I want you to drink more and share your experience with people? Like, what was the experience of tasting that wine? Do I want you to go and share that with your friends and invite them into the community so that I can start selling my wine to them? Like all of these things, you can start to pull on these strings once you understand who's bought your wine, and once you can kind of like, we call it token gating, but once you can basically create these exclusive spaces for people that only people that are holding enough one of your tokens or enough of your tokens can start to access and unlock. So there's all of these great incentive structures that you can start to pull on, as well as just interacting with you on a daily basis. I can now understand who you are at a much deeper level, whereas before I knew nothing. So the blockchain stuff unlocks like all of that.
To me, what's interesting is obviously there are benefits for the producer, the manufacturer, and that you get more data oversight. But for anything that's consumer facing, I'm always just thinking, what's the benefit for the consumer? The thing that you mentioned around the rewards and also the secondary market, I thought was really interesting, because that's the sort of authenticity and provenance of whatever you're buying is always a big concern.
Sure. So there's those things for sure. When we mapped out the original almost like benefits case for Wispir, we kind of looked at the industry in general, back to your strategy piece, and looked at what we saw as being like the problems in the industry. And we kind of split it into problems from the producer side, problems from the consumer side, and a bunch that were, kind of true for both. I can't remember what the number was, but it was somewhere around like 27 to 30 problems that we found. And then basically what we started to look for was, how do we solve those problems? And the vast bulk of them we could solve using blockchain technology. The rest we kind of solved with just like, good UX and good processes, good structures behind, and bits of AI as well. And I would say the split was kind of almost 50-50. So I've talked a lot about the producers, but there were probably about the same number of problems that we could solve on the consumer side. So, at a very simple level, today's consumer is quite different from, consumer maybe 10, 15 years ago. A lot of people of like my generation, as opposed to yours, would be, like much more transactional with the brands that they buy from. Whereas these days people want relationships with their brands, and using this type of technology, we can start to create those relationships, and not only with the brand, but with the other people that, that consume that brand. So you can start to create these communities, and that works really well in, things like wine and spirits, like these collectibles where, naturally outside of brands, pools of people come together to, to form communities. Think about all like, the wine groups and, all of that type of stuff. So you can start to do that, around a brand. You can provide that service for people to coalesce. And if you're a collector of wine, like you can use the blockchain technology to understand how many people have drunk that wine. Like how rare is it now? Like how more valuable should that become? And the blockchain stuff gives you liquidity. It gives you markets. Gives you the ability to go and trade this stuff more readily, 24/7 in a world where you can't really do that. It's heavily intermediated through brokerages, and it's heavily 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, right? So there's loads of benefits from a consumer perspective.
It's almost like you're making it more premium. Obviously, it doesn't change the margins as much. You cut out the middleman, so the margins improve a little bit. But the customer journey there, it reminds me more of like ultra high end. If you buy a Rolex, if you buy a Ferrari, right?
Yeah.
The amount of data and the care that they can afford to give you is astronomical, right? Like it's like an ultra luxury. It's a different experience to just walking into a Walmart and buying but juice.
Completely. I think that's a really astute point, but I almost like two things in response to it. One is that I think that's true today, and the way that can only really be done at that kind of ultra premium level today, because obviously like you're charging a higher price if you're one of those producers, and therefore you've got a kind of higher margin, and you can spend some of that margin on doing the type of stuff that you're talking about. What the blockchain stuff does is it basically it democratizes that capability, because this stuff is like near free to the producer. So all of a sudden, like it doesn't cost them that much anymore to go and provide that type of service. So there's no excuse for like, the guys at the bottom end of the, of the structure from doing that thing. Like it shouldn't just be the preserve of the top end. So actually we think that there are a few people doing the same type of stuff as us. I would say, obviously being heavily biased, that they're doing it in a slightly more kind of superficial way. But what's interesting is that most of the people have gone for that top end of the market. Like that's where they see, this type of product landing. We're kind of the other way around. Like we think that this is a bottom-up democratizing force, which is another one of those traits of blockchain. So we think that, the customers that this most resonates with, or the producers it most resonates with, is like great quality artisan producers with really cult followings who built products that people love and want to evangelize. The producers that we've signed up so far to the platform, which should go live in the next kind of 3-4 months, they all fit that mold. They're all, small artisan producers that people love and they want to form communities around. So my sense is that actually your point is exactly right, but in the blockchain world, you can democratize that, and it no longer becomes the preserve of the high end. We do that stuff for near free. So for example, if you want to tokenize your product, your wine, your spirit, on our platform, we do that for free. Like we don't charge anybody for it. Where we make money is that we have a marketplace where people can buy that physical product with the digital twin, and we'll take very low fees on that. So if a brokerage fee would be like, 8 to 10% or something, our fees are in the kind of 1 to 2% range. So it's, super cheap, distribution, marketing tool for a producer. And if they want to basically tokenize with us, go sell that through somebody else, well, in those instances, we'll charge them a tokenization fee, but it will be super small, right? So this stuff doesn't have a high entry price. brands, producers can come and experiment with us. They can tokenize for free. They can see whether the platform works for them. If it doesn't, they've not lost anything, right? It's very limited time to set this stuff up, and it doesn't cost them anything. So we're giving people the ability to experiment for near free, because we're super confident that, based on our experience, that this resonates with customers, and this will be a great outlet for their production.
Yeah, it's very cool. I've never really thought about that, about how it can be applied to sort of customer journey. It makes it much more real for me, I guess.
Exactly. And we think about it in the high, the high level first. Like, what's the context of the industry? What's the context of your company? What's the context for your customers? And then you start to think about it from those personas perspective, from those customer journey perspectives. Like, where is the friction? Where is this like a low grade product? Where are the opportunities to improve it? And what can you use to help improve that? In some instances, it might just be better UX, might be better process or whatever. We're living in an age where there's loads of technology innovations coming together that I think, drives like a second renaissance, because it's so powerful. Thinking about things like AI, blockchain, robotics, gene therapy, next generation nuclear, that type of stuff. These are the type of things that often will interact with each other, therefore like drives exponential trends, and is all arriving at the same time. So there's a lot of opportunity in this space to unlock things that 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, you just couldn't do. But this technology is arriving now, and it's kind of key to be on the front end of that, in my view.
Yeah. What's the goal with Wispir? Have you spoken to Gary Vee about it?
We haven't. Not yet. Goal with Wispir is first and foremost we want to launch. So we will probably launch in the next 3 to 4 months. Very very openly, we basically have built Wispir on like very little money, so a small angel round. We've probably, because we have the experience and the team from the consulting company that we can apply to Wispir, we've probably been able to do it at like maybe 1/5 the cost that it would generally cost somebody to build this stuff.
Nice.
So we probably need a little bit of angel funding just to get over that hurdle, to finish the build, to take the thing live. So if anybody's listening to this and they've got like spare 10, 20 grand or whatever, very happy to talk. So we're just kind of going through that just top up on the angel thing over the next few weeks. View is that we'll launch in the next 3 to 4 months, and then once we've gone live, once we've proven this out from a product market fit perspective, we've had this kind of period of time to let it bed in, solve any problems. Once it's gone live, then it's all about kind of heavily marketing that, both on the producer side, on the consumer side, and just building out the platform from there. So next 3-4 months, go live with the thing. Probably have 3 to 6 months worth of it bedding in, gaining traction, proving out that kind of product market fit, and then the 6 months after that is heavily marketing it and scaling the use of it, basically. So hopefully within the next 12 to 18 months, we'd love to bring 100,000, 1 million users to this thing. So that's awesome. Where we're trying to head with it, right?
Very exciting. So if anyone knows Gary Vee,
or another person you may or may not know, this is a chap called Raoul Powell, who often does his AMAs with wine in hand. So I'm kind of trying to channel that myself now.
Yeah.
But he he's done some interviews with other people that do similar types of things to us. So if anybody knows Raoul Powell, I'd be delighted to come and speak to him about this stuff as well.
There we go.
Thank you.
We can try. There's no harm in trying.
Fee in it for you, for sure.
Yes. Perfect. Well, I guess just one last question. This is a question that I think I have personally as well, which is, what do you think needs to happen for the tech to become more widely adopted?
Great question. I think that is really crucial. Right? I was again having this conversation today with a kind of big corporate client in the financial services space, and we were talking about UX. So I don't think, relatively speaking, crypto UX is all that bad. It gets a pretty harsh rap, but if you want to go try send an international payment to Uganda or something like that, the UX there isn't great either. Frankly, I think crypto beats that experience. But I think UX is the key, right? All of this kind of nonsense around, wallets as browser extensions and all of that type of stuff is not going to onboard the next, billion users. And there are like, myriads of minds like concentrated on this stuff. But we talk to our clients, particularly if they're like non-crypto native companies, they're, existing companies trying to utilize crypto technology. We talk to them about this concept that we call Web 2.5. Again, we didn't invent the term. But what I mean by that is that you don't present to somebody a Web3 experience. You don't expose them to a crypto asset like an NFT or a digital wallet. What you do is you build great UX in the kind of Web 2 type fashion, and all of the Web3 stuff sits under the hood. That's what gives it the power. That's the engine of it. But it's all about the UX, where you abstract away the complexity, the technology, and you just experience good UX. So in the Wispir context, we never talk about like NFTs. That might be the technology that we use, but we talk about like the digital twin for your bottle. People have to have a wallet to hold that digital twin, a digital wallet, but we don't ever tell them that. What we do is when they sign up and they buy something, we create a digital wallet for free for them. And the way that they access that digital wallet is through their account, their Wispir account. So they just go onto their account page and it's like, oh, there are the bottles of wine that I bought. They don't know that those are like NFTs sitting in a digital wallet, and they don't need to unless they want to. And if they want to, then we'll help educate them. If they want to transfer those assets out of that wallet into one that they, truly own and custody themselves, then we'll help them do that. And we'll educate people. But the key is to like remove all of that friction, all of that conversation about crypto, Web3, all of that stuff like that doesn't onboard users. It's like great UX and what you said before, like great apps, great use cases, like appealing to the consumer. If you can build products that solve a consumer's need, regardless of how it's powered, you will win. So that's what we focus on. It's like, what is the consumer need? How do you service that need? How do you build something that beats everything else that exists on the market? Or how do you use nascent technology to create a need that didn't even exist before? So it's that type of stuff that we focus on. It's like, the UX, the need, the market, that type of thing.
Awesome. Well, Neal, thank you very much. We were meant to talk for half an hour. We've gone for an hour. No. I'm sorry. You're the busy father of three. So
thank you. That's why I'm drinking heavily. So if you'd spoken to the right colleagues, you'd have realised that I have a tendency to like ramble on for way too long. So you'd have been prepared for this, right? You wouldn't have locked like half an hour.
No, this is awesome. This is great. This is amazing.
I appreciate it, Ben. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Neal.
Have a good evening. Cheers.
You too. Cheers.